The mud clung to Elian's feet, like it wanted to keep him from leaving the dying village. Smoke drifted from collapsed huts, and the moaning of the last fevered peasants was carried through the wind like the final breath of the town. He kept his head down, clutching a threadbare satchel. His mother had coughed herself into silence 2 days ago. He hadn't cried. Boots thundered in the distance. Not the soft step of monks who brought salted bread. These were armored, heavy, purposeful. Soldiers. Elian ducked behind the roots of a fallen tree, but it was too late. A mailed hand dragged him up. "You're breathing." "That's enough," the man said flatly. He wasn't cruel, just tired. By midday, Elian and 5 other boys were shoved onto a cart, barely covered, barely alive. Most were younger. A scrawny boy named Henrik kept sobbing. No one comforted him. Not here. The cart stopped at a checkpoint outside the walled city. A robed figure approached, lips moving in prayer. He paused when he saw Elian, his gaze sharpened like a knife-sensing bone. He moved closer, motioned for the guard to stop. "This boy," the monk said, voice low but firm. His face. "It's him," the soldier snorted. "Another peasant brat." "No," the monk insisted. "Look closely. His eyes. That nose. It's him." Within the hour, Elian was removed from the cart. The others were driven away, toward the labor camps, or worse. He didn't know where they went. No one told him. He was taken to a chamber washed in incense and silence. 3 women scrubbed him raw in icy water, shaved his hair, and dressed him in velvet too fine for someone who used to dig potatoes from frozen earth. He didn't speak. They didn't ask. When they tied a blue ribbon around his neck, he finally whispered, "Why?" The elder woman hushed him. "You'll be seen by the Duke. Don't speak again unless told." The door opened. He was led down a corridor lit with tallow candles, their greasy light dancing over tapestries of saints and martyrs. Statues watched him pass. A massive wooden door creaked open. The chamber was wide and cold, despite the fire. A man stood beside a carved chair, pale, wrapped in furs, eyes sunken like someone who hadn't slept in a season. He stared at Elian, not like a man seeing a boy, like a man seeing a ghost. Elian shifted, unsure. The monk beside the Duke spoke softly. "He is your mercy, my lord. The boy's resemblance is proof. The heavens have given you back your son." "No," the Duke muttered. "Not my son, but his shadow." Elian opened his mouth to speak, but the monk raised a hand. Silence. The Duke moved forward. He lifted Elian's chin. His fingers trembled. "You will be called Leontis," he said. "You will remain here. I'll not lose you again." That night, Elian lay in a bed carved with angels. He stared at the beams above, tracing cracks with his eyes. Servants had lit candles all around the chamber. It was warm, safer than anything he'd known, but no comfort came. He walked to a mirror and stared. The face was clean, too clean. His hair was gone. A blue robe clung to his body. He didn't look like anyone he remembered, just the echo of someone lost. He pressed his palm to the glass. That wasn't him. Not anymore. He wanted to ask who Lintus was, what he had done to deserve a second life while Ilian's had been taken away. He returned to bed, not out of obedience, but exhaustion. In the hallway beyond, voices whispered. "He'll pass, for now," the monk said. "But boys grow." "He won't grow," the steward replied. "Not if the apothecary keeps his measure." A pause. "It's mercy," the monk said, almost kindly. "Better this than the pit." Elian closed his eyes, heart pounding. They didn't want him to grow. They wanted him to remain exactly as he was, a fixed memory, a statue with breath. He clutched the thin sheet and wished the fever would come, or at least a dream. But even dreams didn't know who he was anymore. A bell rang before dawn. Elian was already awake. He never really slept anymore. The stone beneath his mattress had begun to feel more familiar than warmth. A servant entered without speaking, carrying a basin of cold water. Elian stepped forward and lifted his arms. She poured it slowly over his head. No towel, no fire. He shook the water off and changed into the blue tunic laid at the edge of his bed. He was escorted through narrow passages to the inner wing. Every morning followed the same steps. Kneel before the painted image of Saint Aurelius. Recite the words taught to him by Brother Henricus. Then wait motionless in the corridor outside the Duke's chambers in case he was summoned. Usually, he wasn't. Still, he waited. There was no laughter here. No songs, no birds. Only the shuffling of soft leather soles and the cold scrape of wooden doors. He had been in the keep for months. No one called him Elian anymore. Everyone called him Leontis, or simply the boy. The servants did not meet his eyes. They called him blessed under their breath, but crossed themselves when he passed. They believed he had returned from death, or worse, that he had never died. The only one who looked at him without fear was Marta, the kitchen girl, who slipped him small ends of bread when the monks weren't watching. She never spoke, but she listened with her eyes. The food he was given was never warm. A crust of barley, bread, goats, milk, once a week, a handful of dried pears when he recited his hymns without error. When he erred, the reward was withdrawn, sometimes for days. Hunger became part of the daily liturgy. One evening, while reading aloud from a leather-bound book of Psalms, his voice cracked. Brother Henricus flinched. "You must speak softly, cleanly. Your voice is sacred." Elian nodded. But the next day, a bitter tea was given to him before his lessons. It numbed his tongue and left his stomach knotted. Every movement was watched. How he sat, how he ate, how he walked. Once, he stumbled during a procession. He was taken to the cellar and left in the dark for an entire day. No blows, no words, just silence, stone and cold. When they fetched him, they said nothing, just handed him a cloak and walked him back to the chapel. The Duke rarely spoke to him anymore. At first, he would sit beside Elian in the chapel, murmuring prayers and stroking his hair like a grieving father touching a memory. But now, he only watched from afar, eyes unreadable. Sometimes, Elian heard him crying alone in the halls at night. Other times, screaming. The castle physician visited once a month. He examined Elian in silence, checking his limbs, his skin, his throat. Afterward, he whispered to the steward. "Elian once caught part of it. He's growing. We must begin sooner." The steward nodded. "He'll not be ready for winter if we delay." Elian said nothing. He had learned the danger of questions. One afternoon, Captain Arvo, who oversaw discipline, approached him in the courtyard. "You're lucky," he said without emotion. "You were chosen. Others shovel dung, sleep in frost, die with names no one remembers. You sit in silk." Elian looked down. "It doesn't feel lucky, because you still remember." Arvo's voice was dry. "That's the worst of it." Later, in his chamber, Elian practiced writing the name Leontis over and over until the letters blurred, his hands ached. The ink froze in the well. He looked out the high window. Snow had started. Another season Marta came that night. She brought him a boiled egg. Warm, Elian stared at it, almost afraid. He took it, nodded thanks. As she turned to leave, he whispered, "Do you know my name?" She paused. Then she signed something with her hands. Elian didn't understand. She repeated, it slowly touching her chest, then forming a circle with her fingers. It wasn't a word he knew, but it felt kind. It felt like a name. That night, Elian curled under the sheet and whispered to himself, "My name is Elian. My mother's name was Britha. My home was near the western brook." He whispered it 3 times, like a spell to keep the memory alive. The next morning, a new robe was waiting for him, white with silver stitching. The steward said nothing as he helped Elian into it. The monk pressed a cold chain into his hands. "Today, You join the sacred procession. Remember who you are meant to be." Elian nodded, his lips sealed. He walked through the corridor, the candles flickering as he passed, watched by faces that saw not a boy, but a relic. The scent of rot crept in first. The physician stopped visiting. Servants wore cloth over their mouths. Whispers spread of a new plague along the trade roads, and soon, entire wings of the keep were sealed. Elian's chamber door remained bolted, from the outside. Food came late, if at all. The guards avoided looking at him. The Duke did not call for him anymore. Elian sat by the small window, watching the snow melt. His reflection was changing. He had grown taller. The sleeves of his robe now reached only his forearms. His face had lengthened. His voice, when he dared to speak alone, trembled with deeper tones. He knew it before they told him he was becoming wrong. When Brother Henricus finally returned, he looked startled. "You must drink the tea again," he said curtly, "and remain indoors. Exposure ruins the image." Elian said nothing, but he did not drink the tea. He no longer prayed. Not aloud, not even in thought. The words felt empty, not his. Just lines fed to a living statue. The steward noticed. One evening, Elian was summoned for failing to attend the morning psalm. The punishment was not loud. He was stripped of his robe and made to kneel in the crypt below the chapel, where bones of nobles and monks had been stacked for 100 years. He remained there for 2 nights, with no food, no blanket, just the cold breath of stone and death. When they retrieved him, his feet were blue. He could not stand. Still, no one touched him gently. Later that week, during a meeting of the Duke's inner circle, Elian was brought forward, dressed in gold-threaded cloth. He was paraded silently before a table of grim-faced men. The steward whispered something. The monk recited a psalm. One of the lords looked away, muttering a prayer. "He is fading," the Duke said quietly. "He must be replaced," came another voice. Elian met the Duke's gaze. No warmth there now, only disappointment, as if a mirror had cracked, as if the ghost he had worshipped no longer obeyed. A few nights later, Elian tried to run. Marta had shown him the passage, a narrow tunnel behind the larder, leading beneath the chapel. He made it as far as the outer wall, before the dogs found him. He didn't scream. The guards bound his wrists and dragged him before the chapel. "Steps. You'll be purified," the monk said, not unkindly. A crowd gathered. No one spoke. Elian was stripped to the waist and lashed, not to punish, but to cleanse. The pain was sharp but brief. What stung more was the silence, the way no one acknowledged him as a person, only as something broken, a symbol failing its role. They locked him in the West Tower afterward. No lessons, no visits, only stale bread, water, and cold. Weeks passed. Then a single day of ceremony. He was dressed again, lips stained with crushed berries, eyes rimmed in ashdot. The Duke came, alone. He stood before Elian and whispered, "Why did you run?" Elian replied, voice hoarse, "Because I'm not him." The Duke nodded. "I know." He turned and left without another word. From then on, no one came except a young cleric who brought ink and paper. Elian was ordered to copy holy verses in silence. Each day, the same passage. Each day, his hands grew weaker. Sometimes, he dreamed of the village, of his mother's hand on his cheek, but even those dreams began to fade. He could no longer remember. Her voice, just shapes, just silence. One morning, the cleric brought a folded parchment and said, "You'll be moved." "Where?" Elian asked. The cleric hesitated. "A monastery, far east. They'll keep you safe." That afternoon, a cart came, covered, unmarked. No one watched him leave. He wasn't escorted like a prince, nor like a prisoner, just another burden, another forgotten piece. Inside the cart, he found the tunic he had worn the first night in the castle, folded, stained, small, He held it close, not for warmth, but memory. The road to the monastery was long and quiet. Trees gave way to misty hills, then stone walls too plain to belong to any lord. The monks who received Elian did not ask questions. They read the parchment, nodded, and led him inside. No words of welcome, no mention of where he came from, just a set of rules and a plain robe. He was given a cell no wider than a bed, one candle, one wooden bowl, one book of scripture. The days became identical. He rose at dawn, prayed in silence, scrubbed the steps, and copied verses until his fingers cramped. No one called him by name. One monk referred to him only as the one from the west. They didn't know who he had been. They didn't care. The winters there were cruel. The wind cut through stone walls like blades. Some mornings, 2 or 3, monks failed to rise. The cold had taken them in the night. No ceremony followed. Just a cloth over the face and a burial near the orchard. Elian dug more than one of those graves. He learned to survive quietly, to bow deeper, to answer only when spoken to. The rules were absolute. A mistake in speech or behavior led to days of isolation, or worse, fasting without end. Once, he forgot a verse. He was locked in the storeroom with no light and fed only water for 4 days. When they opened the door, he didn't speak for a week. Years passed unnoticed. His voice deepened. His hands grew calloused. But inside, he still spoke the old names in secret. His mother, his village, even Marta. Not aloud, only in breath. He watched himself vanish in pieces. First his name, then his memory, then his face. There were no mirrors in the monastery. The only reflection came in puddles after rain, and even then, only long enough to remember that he no longer looked like the boy they once called Leontis. One day, a cart arrived. 2 riders brought scrolls bearing the seal of the new duke. The prior read them behind closed doors. That night, he summoned Elian and said only, "You may remain, or go. The court no longer claims you." Elian stood silent. There was no place to return to. No one who knew him. He remained. His duties changed. He tended the garden, brewed bitter teas, helped in the infirmary. The monks trusted him now, though still no one called him by name. Sometimes travelers passed through. Nobles, pilgrims, even soldiers. Once, he overheard 2 men speaking of a war fought to reclaim a castle in the south. A forgotten duke had died of illness. The family line had ended. No heir named. No monument raised. Elian walked back to the cloister with that news heavy in his chest. There was no record, no trace of who he had been to that man. Not a servant, not a ward, not a son. The records had been burned in a fire. The monk had said it so plainly. One night, Elian lit a candle and opened the book he had once copied every day. He tore out a blank page from the back and began to write not a prayer, but a truth. He wrote his name. He wrote his mother's name, the name of the village. The words shook, but he kept going. What he remembered of the faces, the tower, the silence. Not everything was clear, but he wrote it anyway. He folded the page and hid it behind the stone, near his bed. Not because anyone would find it, but because he needed something in this world to carry the memory. He grew old there, quietly, slowly. His voice faded again. This time not from obedience, but age. When he became too weak to tend the gardens, the monks moved him to the infirmary he had once served. They lit no fire in the room. One morning, he did not rise. No one asked about his past. They buried him with the others beneath the orchard. A simple wooden marker, no name, just a cross. The rain washed it clean within a season. The folded page beneath the stone remained for a while, until another novice was assigned the cell, swept the corners, and tossed it into the fire with other scraps. He didn't read it in the end. Elian was not remembered, not by name, not by deed, but he had lived. He had resisted in the only way he could, by remembering, even when no one else would, and when that memory was gone, there was silence. Just as they had always wanted.